This pretty ting, nice to meet you, mucho gusto. Sweeter than a churro, she call me Papi Chulo. Yeah, I'm single, baby girl, but how about you though? Tryna make you my number.
Reception theory. Reception theory is a process of interpretation and negotiation between the text and also the readers. But when it applied to mass media, readers will become the user, the audience will become the viewer, and the text refers to any mass medium such as newspaper and also televisions. So, based on Wolfgang Iser 1978, one of the founding fathers of reception theory stated that to develop concept of this theory, they need wandering viewpoint, pretension, retention, paradigmatic, syntagmatic components of the text to explain how readers is actually respond to the text. But however, each person has their own ability to interpret the same text differently. Based on Stuart Hall 1973, he believed that the media texts are encoded by the producer and then the texts are decoded by the audience. So it means that the senders encode meaning in their messages according to their own ideas and views of something else, and then the messages are decoded by the receivers according to their own ideas and views as well, but in different ways. And it is not always in the way the producer wants. Whoever writes or produces the text, it must be filled with values and messages in any way. So, like for example, if a producer makes a film, the producer put in certain ideas into that film because they want a particular message to come across the viewers. So hence, by creating particular stories or particular character, so it helps the audience or the viewer to understand more about the film. So next, in Hall's model of communication, which is encoding decoding, he used three types of reading strategies. Firstly, he used dominant reading. Secondly, he used negotiated reading, and lastly, he used oppositional reading. Dominant reading or preferred reading is actually when the text is read in the way the producer intended the text to be read, and the audience will totally agree with the messages and ideology that the producer has placed behind the text. And obviously, the audience will view the text in the way the producer wanted them to be. So this is kind of positive thing for the producer because the text has been successful as to get across the messages and values the procedure itself wanted it to be. So next is negotiated reading. The negotiated reading is actually a compromise between the dominant reading and the oppositional reading of the text. So the audience accepts the views of the producer but also has their own input and understanding of the text. So they do not agree or disagree, but they can however see a point of being met in relation to the reading while also making their own opinions. So basically, this is actually a good response to an advert as it is still getting the message the producer wanted to get across, but they're also making their own judgment. So next is oppositional reading. So basically, oppositional reading is one of the bad response. This is because the audience will reject 100% of the producer's preferred reading and they will create their own reading of the text, and usually this is actually the opposite of what the producer intended it to be. So the reader will reject the meaning completely as they do not agree with the message that is being presented to the audience, and this will cause people disagree with the producer's ideologies and also messages.
Hello everyone, my name is Nur Rahmah and I will present the founder of the reception theory. So the founder of reception theory is Stuart Hall. He was born in Kingston, Jamaica in 1932 and died in London at the age of 82 in February 2014. He was a Jamaican British scholar, writer and cultural studies pioneer. So he adapted this theory to apply to media communication in 1970s. He was the director of the Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies and professor of sociology at the Open University. He was also Rhodes Scholar at Merchant College, Oxford. He has presented a variety of television shows, including the BBC series Redemption Songs, as well as many Open University broadcasts. He was the president of the Sociological Association of Britain and a member of the Committee on the Future of Multi-Ethnic Britain of Running It. The arts organizations Ineva and Autograph, ABP, were both chaired by him. The idea of reception theory is simple. Media producers encode their text with meaning. They can use lighting to convey an emotion or a certain font to communicate. The clothes the character wears identify them as good or bad. There are endless ways for media producers to create layers of meaning with the hope of producing a deep, rich text. This text then handed over to audience to decode it and meaning. Different spectators will decode the text in different ways, not always in the way of producer intended. So we move to next slide. Stuart Hall asserts that there are three ways on how audiences decoded the meaning. First is dominant reading, second is negotiated reading, and the last one is oppositional reading. So what is dominant reading? In this case, the audiences decode the messages exactly as the producer intended. For example, a shoe that looks appealing to a male reader, encouraging him to go out and buy it. This is a positive thing for the producer of the text, as it means the advertisement has been successful as to get across the messages and the values the producer wanted. Another example, such as in the Dark Knight movie, audiences supposed to read Joker as the bad guy. This message conveyed while his frizzy hair makes him look dirty, which means unclean, and that is not one of good guy's appearance. He's wearing makeup on his face, which looks scary and was described as dangerous, and also his bad behavior, which we automatically flag as danger, because we can't identify him as a friend or a foe. Overall, it's a positive reading because producers of the text got the response that they want. The next is negotiated reading. Audiences understand the meaning of connotation of the message of the producers, but need to adapt them to fit with own beliefs. They do not agree or disagree, but in relation to reading, they will see a point being made while still having their own opinions. This is a positive answer to an advertisement, as it still receives the message that the producers tried to get across, even though the reader makes its own decision as well. Example, they see an advertising about delicious cookies and think it looks appetizing, but they could not justify spending the amount of money it would cost. For better understanding, let's take the film Scary Movie 3. Audiences understand that the producer's viewpoint and still find the movie is funny, but the whole concept of forcing a person to live naturally from her death and making a fuss at her funeral is wrong. It conflicts with the audience's ideology. So audience can still watch it and can still find it funny, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. And finally, we have the oppositional reading. The audience reject the producer's message despite understanding with the denoted. This happens when the moral of the acts being carried out are so disturbing with that they reject it outright. They won't find it funny, or doing that thing is fun. The audience refuses the desired reading of the producer and produces its own reading of the text, typically the opposite of the producer intended. The reader fully refuses the interpretation as they do not agree with the message that the viewer is confronted with. This is a negative reaction to an advertisement, as it will mean that people who see it will not want to buy the product and don't agree with the philosophies and message of the manufacturers. For example, a men's underwear commercial is totally rejected as the reader assumes that the advertisement stereotypes and categorizes men in their appearance. So that's all from me. The next slide will be continued by my friend. Thank you.
Now we go to the part 3, Theory Development in Healthcare. The reception theory developed by Stuart Hall itself was known as audience theory or reader's theory in 1973. Stuart Hall has stated the reception theory point out the concept of encoding and decoding. We naturally experience this process in our daily life. First is encoder. The encoder serves as transmitter of information to audience that receive the information. Ellis and McClintock 1990 says that the sender transfer a message to the receiver. In other words, which is communication is a one-way process or a linear according to the transmission model of communication. During the process, the person sending a message will use verbal communication, symbol, sign, and body language to make the audience understand the message. Next, the decoder. Decoder is the audience or person who receives the message from the sender. The audience will process the information received and make their understanding of that. Based on the information, the receiver tries to observe, make a quick response or feedback, and decode in several ways. For example, everyone give a smile and raise his thumb up when you act to pick the trash in the park. You realize that you are not talking to him, but he has appreciated you with honorable deeds. You as the receiver realize that your actions are good and should be emulated. Encoding and decoding will happen to one another from the situation. Sometimes there is a noise where the recipient of the information has been misinterpreted and make the wrong assumption. Next, the consumer perspective contribute to development in healthcare. According to Solomon 1995, the consumer means the process involved when individual or selected group in enjoying or obtaining service, product or idea or experience for their needs or satisfaction. The consumer perspective plays a significant role in the development of health care industry and medical product. The information collected from the patient will be analyzed and cause the demand of health service and medicine to increase. This bilateral interaction between patient and health professional can foster cooperation in reaching consensus, and the health problem encounter can be refined and assisted. As a contemporary consumer perspective, this active agent will be influenced not for the economy but also the quality of the product or organizational effectiveness. Communication in Healthcare Problem and Solution. On August 2018, a special webinar was organized by Putra, Healthcare Communication and Telehealth Platform to discuss on several communication problems and suggest a solution in healthcare. This webinar is hosted by James Woodson, who was medical doctor as a CEO of Putra, and the invited speaker is William Atkinson, President of Guidon Healthcare Consulting. In the discussion, they found that medical error cost up to 400,000 deaths per year, and 80% of them result from miscommunication between caregiver during transition of care. This communication problem also included the industry inefficient protocol and silos as a barrier to communication. Silos mentality is a set of individual or group mindset that can cause different division in health organization, created the barrier to the process. So, there are 3 steps to improve communication, and this solution must be accessible to all departments, health system, and hospital network, so the patient can be focused without disruption and wasted time. First, they must create a dedicated patient channel for any situation and healthcare entity. Secondly, the healthcare department should provide a team to access the patient channel. This channel must include the emergency medical service provider, transfer center, or special department. Once they are access to that, they will be able to view the message securely. Finally, the team must be able to communicate with each other using the communication device. Once the team is recruited, they must be able to communicate via text messaging, video call, sending audio clip, photos, and lab result.
A very good day bid to our Dr. Bimala and all of our viewers. Today I'm going to present my part, which is role of the reception theory. Without further ado, let's proceed to the next slide. So, as we have already known in the previous slide presentation, the reception theory was developed by Stuart Hall, and the reception theory can also be known as audience theory. So, what is reception theory? So, reception theory is a form of readers or audience's response literary theory that highlight every reader's or audience's acceptance toward a literary content. Yeah. So, moving on to the next slide. Okay. So moving on to the next slide, which is the role of the reception theory in general. So regarding to the topic, in general, the role of the reception theory is to determine where the message and contents that was sent by the sender can be understood completely by the receiver. So based on the article entitled Reception Theory in Mass Communication, Psychology, Behavioral and Social Science, the meaning concept of the reception theory can be found from Stuart Hall's essay entitled Encoding and Decoding Television Discourse. The essay basically focused on the encoding and decoding contents that was shown to the public through any form of media, for instance, conventional media. Or digital media, as we know there are new type of media right now, right? So okay, moving on. The encoding part in terms of reception theory means that the encoded message by the sender normally can be relayed with other people, meaning that the sender must think about how the receiver will figure out the implied message in the sender's content. Okay, moving on to the next point, which is the decoding part. The decoding part in terms of reception theory means that the decoding of a message would be considered as a successful delivery only if the implied message in the sender's content can be translated and completely understood by the receiver as it was originally intended by the sender. Any message that was sent by the sender in a form of verbal or non-verbal signal or action sometimes did not produce the same result as what message was the sender expected the public to understand. So any messages that was sent by the sender are usually okay, sorry for the weird cut. What I was going to say is the signal or action, the messages in the content that was sent by the receiver usually did not produce the same result as what message was the sender expected the public to understand. Meaning, let's say that in advertisement, the sender want people to understand that 1 + 1 is 2, but when the receiver received the advertisement, the content, they think 1 plus 1 is 11. So it's not the same. It's not the same result. It's not the same message that was received, that was interpreted by the sender, and the message that was originally intended by the sender. So you know, like the different side. So okay, moving on. Alright, moving on. The difference between the sender and public's understanding towards the message will bring a new different meaning to the message that was sent by the sender to the public. This branched understanding, meaning separated understanding, towards a message usually happens because some people cannot entirely understand the concept that was applied on the message. So this kind of twist or distortion often happens usually due to a few factors such as age, race, gender, ethnicity, class, culture, and mood, which can affect the audience's interpretation towards the received message that was sent by the sender. Yeah. So moving on to the next slide. Moving on to the next slide, which is which is the role of the reception theory in terms of healthcare practices. Yeah. So next slide. Okay. In terms of practices of the reception theory in healthcare, the reception theory are widely implied in healthcare advertisements in a way that communities can easily and directly understand by just look at their advertisements once, meaning they look at it just one time and they can 100% understand what the advertisement was talking about. Yeah. So okay, moving on. Based on a research project journal entitled Audience Reception of Health Promoting Advertising, Young Adult Smokers Make Sense, Interpret, and Decode Shocking Anti-Smoking Advertisements. Such a long title, right? Okay. Written by Christian Raftopoulos. Okay. I don't know if it's a he or she. So the writer stated that rough and acceptable, audacious type of advertising plan of action turned up to be more compelling in order to reduce the amount of tobacco consumption. So he or she stated that mean or rough advertisements can affect the total amount of tobacco consumption, which means it can help to reduce the tobacco consumption. For an example, if you see on the cigarettes box, there's an advertisement, or it can be said as warning. If you smoke that thing, it can cause a certain type of disease, maybe cancer, lung cancer, mouth cancer, disease that can be caused by cigarettes. So moving on. Alright, moving on. Sorry for the breakdown. Moving on. Christian Raftopoulos also stated that emotional appeals elements are widely being used in health promotion campaign and anti-smoking advertisements as a persuasive type of communication to trigger uneasiness or fear in order to make the communities understand on how important it is to always taking care of their own health. Okay, so as you can see in this slide, these are one of the example of what we say is direct information exposure, or it can be said as mean or acceptable audacious type of advertisements to show that what happens if you do not care about your health, if you continue to smoke. Yeah, so the advertisement works that way. So it shows that what happens if you smoke, if you don't stop smoking for a long period of time. You continue to smoke, maybe 1 to 3, maybe a few years, you did not see the effects, but you can see the effects when you're older, when you grow older. So you can see the effects like cancer, as you can see, cancer, disease that can be caused by cigarettes. So I think that is all from me. Thank you for your time.